You hurt my feelings. You didn't, but that's the title of this movie that I'm reviewing right now. I just saw it. It's the newest film by director Nicole Holofcener. She also wrote the film, produced it as well alongside some other people. And at its core, this film is about a bunch of people, and mainly in this case, people that are in relationships with other people that are struggling to be honest and be open with each other about their feelings. And that's kind of where the feelings concept comes into play. And it's an interesting concept that it centers around, because the main couples in this movie that it focuses on, which I would say is only two, they seem to get along with each other well, and they've been in sort of long marriages at this point in their lives. But it really has to do with their professions, where some of the difficulties in being honest are encountered. The married couple that is focused on the most in this film is Beth and Dawn, played by Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Tobias Menzies, respectively. Beth is a writer who, in the course of this film, is actually writing a novel. Dawn is a therapist, and a struggling therapist at that, struggling to get to his patients and get his patients to open up. They really do kind of hammer down this idea that maybe therapy is just not the profession for him. There's also the storyline surrounding Sarah, who's Beth's sister. Sarah and her husband Mark. Mark's played by Arian Moayed. Sarah is played by Michaela Watkins. The primary conflict of the film comes from this novel that Beth is writing throughout it. And they make clear that she is already an established writer, having written another novel in the past, also teaching a writing class to other people. Other writers or people trying to become writers, giving them possible ideas for what they are working on as well, which I found interesting because it's also made clear that Beth is pretty insecure about her own work and is not too confident in her own self. And the big thing that happens comes from her husband's reaction to the work that she's producing at the moment, which I won't say what specifically it is or what occurs, but this kind of causes some tribulations with the stability of their marriage. And also, I don't mean to keep going back and forth between characters, but we do get the perspective of Sarah and Mark as well. And Sarah can kind of relate to what Beth is going through a little bit, and to reiterate, Sarah is Beth's sister, because her husband Mark is a struggling actor, struggling to find jobs, to maintain jobs. And so she's able to relate to Beth kind of like that, because Beth's husband is also kind of struggling being a therapist, reaching out to his patients. And as I sit back and kind of just look at the screenplay, and first of all, just the story I think is very well laid out, and each character, you have a clear idea of who they are, what they do, how they get along with their significant other, and what their current struggle is at the time that this takes place. And it dawned on me that they all have a lot in common. They all have a lot that they could relate to and bond over, yet a connection is kind of frowned upon in this moment. They're not really able to reach those moments where they can connect and kind of solve these problems that they're going through. There's also the addition of the character Elliot, played by Owen Teague, who I think is a pretty underrated part of this film. He plays Beth and Dawn's son, and he is in somewhat of a similar situation as the other main characters, where he's also kind of in a struggling relationship, but he's also struggling to find out what he wants to do. He works at a job which not a very steady job, not a very reliable one, so he's kind of trying to also figure out his life path, in the process of his parents and these other people focused on are trying to get over similar things. I have almost no complaints about the way that the movie is laid out, the structure of the story. The one thing though that did kind of bother me was there's a time jump that occurs at one point. After this time jump occurs, things are pretty much kind of resolved between our characters. And I wish we got more of the build up to this resolution. We get a little bit of it, but unfortunately it's not as much as I would have wanted. While I do think a lot of the dialogue is very good, very raw, authentic, I really do believe that there are moments where it does feel a little bit forced, and they try to especially force in some humor. And it's even more stand out in this movie because, as I said, there are certain scenes that feel incredibly real and grounded, and almost like I wasn't even watching a movie, like I was just watching two people talk and interact with each other. It's great, but then it makes those moments when there's this forced, out of nowhere comedy be all the more obvious and, quite frankly, annoying. There is some other great humor too in the film. I don't want to say that all of the comedy is bad. Most of it honestly did land for me. It's dry for the most part, and it kind of lends to those, you could say, awkward silences, those moments that I thought mostly worked. I also do just want to say, before I get to my proper closing thoughts, that I think the running time is perfect. It's 93 minutes long, and even though I did say I would have liked a little more to be fleshed out with the characters kind of getting to the resolutions of their problems that they had to begin with, I think, you know, the 90 or so minute runtime was great. And I think if it had been like 2 hours, then I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much, and probably not have given it as high of a rating as I'm going to give it. I thought this movie was very good. I think that Nicole Holofcener did a great job with the direction. A lot of the writing, the dialogue was very sharp. The cast was excellent, and it's able to, you know, kind of get a lot from a relatively, you know, kind of uneventful premise. Kind of like with the movie Air, how I was not expecting much to come out just from the story of, you know, Nike convincing Michael Jordan to sign with them, but they were able to get quite a bit out of it. It's one of my favorite movies of this year so far, and they're able to do that with the story here as well, which is a great one at that, a very relatable one. And I think just the great filmmaking all around and the great acting made this a good time at the theater, and a style that is not necessarily unique, but I think fits very well for this kind of movie. If I were to compare it to two other filmmakers, I would say it's like a mix of Noah Baumbach and Nancy Meyers. Baumbach in the sense of the dialogue and the dynamics between the characters, and Meyers more with the comfort that comes from this movie and the feel-good nature of it, and also kind of the more serious dramatic elements as well. You heard my feelings. For me, it's going to get an 8.5 out of 10. I would recommend going to see this movie, not only because I think it is quality, but other than the fact that it's distributed by A24, I don't really see anything else that would lend to this getting big box office numbers. So if you can, I would suggest going to check this out in a theater. I appreciate you all watching, and peace out.